I never thought I'd be the guy typing this out on Reddit, spilling my guts to a bunch of strangers, but life has a funny way of shoving you into corners you never expected. My name's Michael, and I've been married to Sarah for 10 long years. We've got 2 beautiful daughters, and on the surface, everything seemed, well, perfect. The house, the family, the life. But lately, things have been different. Real different. Sarah started acting distant, cold even. The kind of cold where you know something's off but can't put your finger on it. I thought maybe it was the stress of her job. She's a big shot at some marketing firm. Meanwhile, I gave up my career a few years back to be a stay-at-home dad. Yeah, laugh it up, the guy who traded spreadsheets for diaper duty. But I didn't mind. I loved being with the girls, and I thought we were in this together, Sarah and me, a real partnership. Boy, was I wrong. It all started one morning when she left her phone on the kitchen counter. She'd been getting more secretive with it lately, always turning the screen away from me, but I never pushed. Stupid me. But that day, she forgot to take it, and something inside me, call it instinct, told me to check. So I did. There it was, plain as day. Messages from a guy named James. They weren't just friendly work texts either, they were loaded with enough emotion to make me sick. Last night was amazing, one read, followed by some goddamn heart emojis. Another one, can't wait until we're together again. It was like someone had punched me straight in the gut, and all I could do was stare at the screen, feeling my world crumble. But I didn't confront her, not right away. That would have been too easy for her, too damn easy. So I sat with it, let it stew in my mind, and decided I needed to know more. Was it just this James guy? Was this a fling or something bigger? And most importantly, what the hell was she planning? I found a private investigator, some guy who didn't ask too many questions. Told him what I knew, handed him Sarah's schedule, and let him do the dirty work. The next few weeks were the longest of my life. Every time Sarah smiled at me or kissed our daughters goodnight, I wondered how deep her betrayal really went. How long had she been living this double life? And why was I the last to know? Turns out, she'd been screwing James for months. The investigator brought me photos, her and James in hotels, restaurants, sneaking off like a couple of horny teenagers. It wasn't just physical either. Their texts were full of future plans. They were talking about moving to Europe together, taking my girls, and leaving me in the dust. That's when the rage hit. I mean, it was one thing to cheat, but to plan to take my kids away? That was war. But I knew better than to lose my cool. She thought she had me fooled, thought she could play me like a chump. So I played along, pretending everything was fine at home while she continued her little affair. I even made an effort to be more loving, more present, just to keep her guard down. I needed time to set my trap. Now, here's where things got interesting. You see, Sarah wasn't just screwing around with James. Nope, that'd be too simple. There was another guy, Eric, another damn colleague. She was stringing him along too, getting emotional support from him while using James for, well, the other stuff. Apparently, having one guy wasn't enough for her. So I started working behind the scenes. I knew James had a bit of a reputation for being a player, and Sarah? Well, she was always a little insecure about whether he was loyal. So I made sure to plant the seed that James might be seeing someone else. A few whispers in the right ears, some anonymous texts to Sarah, just enough to get her paranoid. She started acting strange, always checking her phone, getting frustrated with James. Meanwhile, I was playing the perfect husband, smiling through the bullshit, waiting for the right moment to strike. It wasn't long before I found the perfect opportunity. I discovered a way to turn Eric against James, to make both of them suspicious of Sarah's involvement with the other. I'd slip in a few fake messages here, a hint of jealousy there, until both of these idiots started questioning her loyalty. I was setting the stage for the implosion of Sarah's entire little world, and she didn't have a clue. It was only a matter of time before the whole thing blew up in her face. But I had to be patient. I had to make sure every piece of evidence was solid, airtight. Because when I made my move, there'd be no turning back. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, the slow burn. I kept playing the role of the oblivious husband while Sarah's web of lies unraveled in front of me. The tension in the house grew thick. She must have felt it too, but she couldn't figure out why. I watched her second-guess herself, wondering if she was being too obvious, if I'd caught on. But I kept up the act. It was almost fun in a sick way, knowing more about her life than she thought I did. The private investigator kept feeding me a steady stream of dirt. I got updates daily, photos, texts, even audio recordings. And man, some of the things she said about me to James. If I'd had any love left for her, it would have died right there. She talked about me like I was some boring, useless guy she couldn't wait to be rid of. She complained about how I'd lost my ambition and wasn't the man she married. All the while, I was raising our daughters, keeping our home running, sacrificing my own career so she could chase hers. But according to her, I was nothing. Whatever. She didn't know what was coming. It wasn't just the affair with James either. Sarah started to pull away from me more, spending even less time at home. The girls noticed too. Our oldest, Ella, started asking why Mommy wasn't around as much. That hurt. It's one thing to cheat on me, but when it started affecting the kids, that's when I knew I had to speed things up. I couldn't let this drag on much longer, not with her planning to take them halfway across the world with that sleazebag. The whole thing came to a head one night after the girls were asleep. Sarah had come home late again, no explanation, just the usual half-assed excuses about work and client dinners. I played along, asked her how her night was, smiled like an idiot. But inside, I was boiling over. I'd had enough. I couldn't resist pushing her buttons a little. I asked her if she ever felt guilty about leaving the girls so much. Her eyes widened, just for a second, like I'd hit a nerve. But then she brushed it off. Oh, Michael, please. I'm doing this for all of us. You know how demanding my job is. Yeah, I said, but it's starting to feel like you're not just working late. I mean, it's like you don't want to be here anymore. She looked at me sharply, her eyes narrowing. What are you trying to say? I shrugged. I don't know. Just feels like we're drifting apart, don't you think? She turned away, clearly uncomfortable. Good. I wanted her to squirm. But I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. Not until I had everything lined up. Maybe we should talk, I added casually. You know, about where this is all going. I don't want us to lose each other. That hit her like a punch. She hesitated, probably wondering if I knew. She was silent for a long moment, then forced a smile. Yeah, maybe we should. It was such a fake, rehearsed response that I almost laughed. She had no idea I was already 10 steps ahead of her. I let the conversation drop there, deciding to wait until I had more leverage. Because here's the thing, I wasn't just going after Sarah. No, I was going to make sure her precious James and Eric went down with her. The next day, I set things into motion. I had enough dirt on Sarah to wreck her life, but that wasn't enough. I wanted her to feel the same betrayal, the same pain I'd been living with for weeks. So I got in touch with someone who worked with James, a mutual acquaintance who had a reputation for being a bit of a gossip. I made sure he accidentally overheard a conversation about James seeing someone else on the side. It didn't take long for word to get back to Sarah. Within days, she was tense, paranoid, checking her phone constantly. She started grilling James about where he was, who he was with. It was delicious to watch. Meanwhile, I kept feeding little bits of information to Eric, hinting that Sarah was involved with someone else. It didn't take much to get him riled up. He was already insecure about his relationship with her. Before long, both of them were suspicious, and the whole thing was falling apart. But just as I was getting ready to make my move, I found out something that almost knocked me off my game. Sarah had beaten me to the punch. She'd already hired a divorce lawyer. That was the moment I realized just how far ahead she thought she was. She was planning to file first, paint me as the unfit husband, and walk away with full custody of the kids, leaving me with nothing. The house, the savings, the girls, they were all part of her plan to cut me out of her life completely. She didn't just want to leave me. She wanted to destroy me. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her file first, not with the way the courts tend to favor the mother in custody battles. And with her lawyer in play, things could get messy real quick. So, I called my lawyer, laid everything out, every sordid detail, every piece of evidence I had on her affairs. I told him we had to move now. We filed for divorce the next morning. The shock on Sarah's face when she got served was priceless. She came home that night furious, her anger barely contained. The second the girls were in bed, she confronted me, her voice cold and sharp. "What the hell, Michael? You filed for divorce?" I leaned back in my chair, trying to look as casual as I could. "Yeah. I thought it was time, don't you?" Her eyes were blazing, but she tried to stay calm. "You're making a mistake. I've already talked to a lawyer. You're not going to win this." I stood up, walked over to her, and looked her dead in the eyes. "Sarah, you don't even know what game we're playing yet." She blinked, confused for a split second, and that's when I knew I had her. Everything was about to fall apart for her, and she had no idea how deep the hole went. But she was about to find out. The look on Sarah's face when I said those words, that blank, confused expression, was worth all the hell I'd been through. She had no idea how deep she was in, no clue that I had all the cards. For a split second, I thought she might break down, confess everything, but nah. She wasn't that type. Sarah wasn't going to give up without a fight. "What the hell are you talking about, Michael?" she snapped, her voice getting louder. "You think you can just file for divorce and walk away with everything? You're delusional." I crossed my arms, trying to stay calm, but inside, I was buzzing with adrenaline. "I know everything, Sarah. I've got the evidence. I've got witnesses. You've been cheating on me with James and Eric." Her eyes widened for just a moment before she quickly masked it with anger. "You don't know what you're talking about." That's when I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through the pictures. "You want to see?" I asked, my tone cold. "I've got photos, text messages, video recordings, you name it. You thought I was stupid? Thought I wouldn't figure it out?" She froze. I could see her mind racing, trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But there wasn't any way out. She knew it. Her anger flared up again, but this time it was more defensive. "You think this is all on me? We haven't had a real marriage in years, Michael. You stopped caring about me, about us. And don't act like you're some saint, staying at home with the kids while I work my ass off to keep us afloat." I let out a bitter laugh. "Wow, that's rich. So, what? You had to find comfort in the arms of two other men because I wasn't good enough for you anymore? Give me a break, Sarah. I've been here, raising our daughters, keeping this family together while you ran off and did whatever the hell you wanted. Don't twist this around." "You don't understand," she spat, her voice cracking a little. "You never understood. I didn't ask for this life. I didn't want to be stuck in this boring, suburban hell with someone who has no ambition. I could feel my blood boiling, but I wasn't about to let her turn this into a pity party for herself. You're unbelievable. You've been planning this, haven't you? Running off to Europe with James, taking the girls, leaving me behind to rot. Her face went pale. That was it, the nail in the coffin. She realized I knew everything. For a moment, she stood there, stunned, as if the weight of it all was crashing down on her. But she wasn't done fighting. Not yet. You think you're going to win this, Michael? You think you'll get custody? The courts favor the mother. And I've already got a lawyer who's going to bury you in that courtroom. You'll end up with nothing. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Maybe. But you forget, I'm not the only one with something to lose here. She narrowed her eyes. What do you mean? I unlocked my phone and showed her the screen. It was a text message chain between James and Eric, two men who didn't know they were both being played by the same woman. And I had made sure they'd both found out about each other. James and Eric aren't too happy with you right now, I said. Turns out, when you're playing two guys at the same time, they don't take it too well. In fact, I'm sure they'd love to come to court and testify about your extracurricular activities. Sarah's face twisted into something I hadn't seen before, real fear. Not anger, not frustration, but actual fear. She knew she was cornered. You wouldn't, she whispered, her voice shaking. I shrugged. Why wouldn't I? You think I care anymore? I'm done, Sarah. I've got nothing left to lose. But you've got everything to lose. Your reputation, your job, the kids, everything. Her breathing quickened, and I could see the panic setting in. Michael, please, we don't have to do this. I smiled bitterly. Oh, but we do. She stepped forward, her voice softening, trying a different tactic. Think about the girls. Do you really want to drag them through a messy divorce? Do you want them to grow up in the middle of this war? That hit me hard. She was right, in a way. The girls didn't deserve this, didn't deserve to see their parents tear each other apart. But I also knew I couldn't back down now. Not after everything she'd done. Not after the betrayal. I'm doing this for them, I said quietly. I'm not letting you take them away from me. I'm not letting you run off with some guy and pretend like none of this matters. Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't buying the act. She was trapped, and she knew it. I had all the evidence I needed to win in court. And if she kept pushing, I was ready to burn it all down. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Fine. What do you want? There it was. The moment I'd been waiting for. She was finally ready to negotiate, to realize she wasn't going to win this on her terms. I want custody of the kids, I said firmly. I want the house. And I want you to walk away without trying to take everything from me. She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. Don't even think about fighting me on this. You know I'll drag James and Eric into court if I have to. You'll be humiliated. And they'll be more than happy to turn on you if it means saving themselves. She closed her mouth, her jaw clenched tight, and I could see the war raging inside her. She wanted to fight, but she knew she couldn't win. Not this time. Okay, she finally muttered, her voice bitter and defeated. I'll sign the papers. But I wasn't done yet. And one more thing. You tell the girls the truth. You explain to them why this is happening. They deserve to know. She glared at me, but I didn't care. This was the least she could do after everything she'd put us through. Fine, she snapped. But don't think for a second that this is over, Michael. You might have won this round, but we'll see how things play out in court. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I knew I'd already won. She could throw all the threats she wanted at me, but I had the upper hand now. As she stormed out of the room, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot, but I was finally in control. I'd played the long game, and it was paying off. I knew Sarah wouldn't go down without a fight. Even though she'd agreed to sign the papers, I had a feeling she wasn't done trying to screw me over. And as expected, the very next day, she met with her lawyer again. How did I know? Because my private investigator was still on the case. He'd been tailing her, gathering every bit of dirt I could use to sink her if she tried to pull anything. The day after that little showdown in the kitchen, I got a call from my lawyer. He told me Sarah's lawyer had reached out, and they were preparing for a real battle over custody. Apparently, Sarah had changed her mind overnight and now wanted to drag me through the mud. She was banking on the court siding with her because she's the mother. She was planning to paint me as a lazy, stay-at-home dad who didn't contribute financially and couldn't provide for the kids. Typical Sarah. She always thought she could manipulate the situation, twist it to her advantage. But I had the ultimate weapon, her double life. She didn't know just how deep I'd dug into her affairs. And it wasn't just James and Eric. I'd found out through the investigator that she'd been seeing a few other guys on the side too. Apparently, Sarah wasn't just a cheater, she was a serial cheater. I sat down with my lawyer and laid out everything I had, the texts, the pictures, the videos, the recorded conversations. We were ready to fight fire with fire. If she wanted to take it to court, I was more than prepared to scorch the earth. A week passed, and the tension in the house was unbearable. Sarah was avoiding me as much as possible, barely looking me in the eye. But when she did, I could see the hatred behind her cold stare. She was planning something. I could feel it. And then, out of nowhere, she dropped the bomb. "I'm moving out," she said one morning while I was making breakfast for the girls. Her tone was flat, like she was announcing something as simple as going to the grocery store. "I've found an apartment." I looked up from the stove, trying to keep my face neutral. "Really? That fast?" She shrugged, not meeting my gaze. "Yeah, James is helping me. We're moving in together." There it was. She wasn't even hiding it anymore. She was going all in with James, no shame, no remorse. And just like that, she was ready to abandon the life we'd built, walk out on our daughters like they were some kind of afterthought. "What about the girls?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "You planning on taking them with you?" Sarah sighed, finally turning to face me. "We'll figure it out in court, Michael. But you can't give them what I can. You don't have a job, you don't have any income. How are you going to provide for them?" I clenched my jaw, trying to control my temper. She was playing dirty, like I knew she would. But I wasn't going to take the bait. I had to stay calm, keep my eye on the bigger picture. "They're my daughters, Sarah," I said slowly, my voice cold. "I've been the one taking care of them while you've been off screwing around. I'm not letting you take them." She rolled her eyes. "We'll see what the court thinks about that." And with that, she walked out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, fists clenched, seething. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. A few days later, we had our first court hearing. My lawyer had filed everything, my case for full custody, evidence of Sarah's affairs, and her plans to abandon the country with James and the kids. I sat in that courtroom, nerves eating away at me, but I was ready. I'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, and now it was time to take her down. Sarah walked in with her lawyer, looking smug as hell. She was dressed like she was ready for a goddamn fashion show, playing the part of the perfect, successful career woman. James wasn't with her, probably too smart to show his face in a courtroom battle that was about to blow his whole life up. But I could feel his presence hanging over everything, like a shadow that followed Sarah wherever she went. The first part of the hearing was tense. Her lawyer went on and on about how she was the primary breadwinner, how I had no income, no real prospects, and how I couldn't provide the stable environment the girls needed. They painted me as some loser who gave up on his career to be a house husband, someone who couldn't possibly take care of 2 kids on his own. It took everything I had not to explode right there. But I kept my cool. I let them talk, let them spin their web of lies, because I knew what was coming next. Then it was my lawyer's turn. He stood up, calm and collected, and started presenting the evidence. One by one, he laid out Sarah's infidelities, starting with James, then Eric, then the other men. He showed the court the text messages, the photos, the hotel receipts. He talked about her plans to run off to Europe, leaving me behind without a second thought. And then, the cherry on top, we brought in James. The moment his name was called, I saw Sarah's face go white as a sheet. She had no idea he was going to be a witness. James took the stand, and while he tried to play it cool, it was clear he was nervous. Under questioning, he admitted to the affair, admitted that he and Sarah had been seeing each other for months, and, worst of all for Sarah's case, he admitted that she had talked about taking the kids and leaving me behind. It was brutal. By the time my lawyer was done, Sarah looked like she'd been hit by a freight train. And I wasn't done yet. Next up was Eric. Same routine. He confirmed everything, and by the time he was off the stand, Sarah's entire case had crumbled. The judge was stone-faced, but I could tell from the look in his eyes that he wasn't buying Sarah's perfect mother act anymore. When the hearing ended, Sarah stormed out of the courtroom, her face twisted in rage. I followed my lawyer out, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. The battle wasn't over yet, but we'd won a huge victory that day. Sarah was going to lose. She knew it. And the best part? She'd done it to herself. All the lies, all the manipulation, all the betrayal, it had all come back to bite her. And now, the only thing left to do was finish what I'd started. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was finally getting my life back, one piece at a time. But I knew it wasn't over yet. Not completely. There was still more to do, more battles to fight. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The final court hearing was set for a few weeks later, and the tension between Sarah and me only grew in the meantime. We still had to live under the same roof, which made every day feel like a ticking time bomb. I was counting down the days until this nightmare would finally be over, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Sarah might have been backed into a corner, but she wasn't finished. She was planning something, I could feel it. The night before the final hearing, she came into the living room, where I was sitting with a glass of whiskey, trying to relax. She stood there for a moment, just staring at me, and I could tell she was gearing up for something. "Michael," she started, her voice softer than usual. "Can we talk?" I glanced at her, skeptical. "What's there to talk about, Sarah?" "You made your choices," she sighed, taking a seat across from me. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the floor, and then she spoke again. "I don't want this to get uglier than it already is. We don't have to tear each other apart in court tomorrow." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "Now you want to talk about keeping things civil? After everything you've done?" After trying to take the girls away from me, she flinched, but I wasn't about to let her play the victim. "Look," she said, her voice tight with frustration, "I get it. I screwed up. But we can still work something out. For the sake of the kids," there it was, the last-ditch effort to make me back off. But I saw right through it. She didn't care about working things out for the girls. She cared about saving face, about clawing back some control. I leaned forward, setting my drink down on the table. "You're only saying this because you know you're going to lose tomorrow. You know the judge saw through your act. You're trying to salvage whatever you can, but it's too late, Sarah. You made your bed." Her eyes filled with anger, and she stood up, her fists clenched at her sides. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you've never made mistakes. Well, you know what? I wouldn't have done any of this if you hadn't checked out of our marriage years ago. There it was again, the deflection, the attempt to make me the bad guy. But I wasn't going to take the bait. I didn't check out, Sarah, I said quietly, my voice steady. I was here, every damn day. You're the one who decided to find comfort in other men. You're the one who thought you could have it all, your career, your affairs, and your family on the side. But it doesn't work that way. She stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, as if she was about to explode. But instead, she turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, staring at the door, feeling a strange sense of finality wash over me. The next morning, we were back in court. I sat there, calm and composed, while Sarah's lawyer tried to salvage what little dignity she had left. But it was clear from the start that the judge wasn't buying it. My lawyer presented the final pieces of evidence, more texts, more proof of Sarah's multiple affairs, and even a video recording of her discussing her plans to leave the country with the kids. The judge's face remained impassive, but when he finally spoke, I could tell from his tone that we had won. After reviewing the evidence presented, the judge said, his voice steady, "It is clear that Mrs. Parker has not acted in the best interest of the children. Her extramarital affairs and her plans to relocate the children without Mr. Parker's consent are deeply concerning. Therefore, I am granting full custody of the children to Mr. Parker, with supervised visitation rights for Mrs. Parker. Additionally, Mr. Parker will retain ownership of the family home, and the division of assets will reflect Mrs. Parker's lack of contribution to the household." I barely heard the rest of what the judge said. All I could think about was the fact that I had won. I had fought for my daughters, for my life, and I had come out on top. Sarah sat there, staring at the judge with a blank expression, as if she couldn't quite believe what was happening. But it was real. It was over. As we left the courtroom, Sarah didn't say a word to me. She walked out with her lawyer, her head held high, but I knew she was shattered inside. Her life was in ruins, and there was no one to blame but herself. Back at the house, I started packing up her things. It felt surreal, like the end of a long, drawn-out war. The girls were at my parents' place for the week, so I had the house to myself. As I packed up Sarah's clothes, her makeup, her jewelry, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, it all swirled together. But most of all, I felt free. Later that night, as I sat on the porch with another glass of whiskey, I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal, the lies, the months of pretending everything was fine while I plotted my revenge. It had been brutal, but in the end, I'd come out stronger. I'd fought for my daughters, and I'd won. I don't know what Sarah's future holds, and honestly, I don't care. She'll have her supervised visits with the girls, and maybe someday she'll realize what she threw away. But for me, I'm moving forward. I've got a fresh start ahead of me, with my girls by my side, and that's all that matters now. This whole experience taught me something important. Revenge isn't about hurting the other person. It's about reclaiming your life, taking back control, and standing up for what you deserve. I didn't just get even with Sarah. I took back everything she tried to steal from me, my dignity, my family, my future. And that's the sweetest revenge of all. Thanks for sticking with me through this whole mess, Reddit. It's been one hell of a ride, but I'm finally ready to close this chapter of my life.